Hey everyone, this is Curb Knight, and at long last I am going to be bringing you my standard Maelstrom deck profile. So now this is the deck you have been seeing me play in a couple of the previous videos. I have quite a lot of Maelstrom videos on my channel, so I figured I'd finally go over the deck list now that I have time and Springfest is all over. So just quickly talking about Springfest, we actually didn't really do that well. In the standard tournament. I took this deck to Springfest and it did everything it could, but unfortunately it just wasn't enough. I faced against, God, what was it? I faced against Kyrie round one, won. Then I faced against Chronojet, which I kind of low rolled a little bit, and they kind of high rolled a bit. Like against the first Chronojet player, they healed 3 times on me. So I was just not able to close it out. Even though this deck is kind of built in a certain way to beat Chronojet, and I think it's definitely possible, as you saw in that video. But just that day was kind of like terrible for everyone in our group. But you know, it is what it is. Anyways, I went up against 2 Ava matchups. Low rolled a little bit, but I tried my best. I think that Ava is just kind of too good of a deck for this. You can definitely hang with it, but like if you want to win against it, it takes a lot of effort on your part. Whereas the Ava player just does what they do, and they can win. So. Alright, so as always, we are going to be starting off with the ride deck. I suppose we'll go ahead and start at the beginning, which is going to be our Officer Cadet Eric. So now, I see a lot of people just playing like any standard Stoicheia starter. I would recommend playing Eric just because he has Aqua Force. So if you're in a really tight pinch, theoretically you can revive this or call it out, because there are a lot of skills that do require an Aqua Force. And I would rather just have more options there than like just not have them. Because if this is like say a Lotte, you lose out on a lot of the interactions with a ton of the other cards. But moving on to the grade 1, which is going to be Theo. So Theo has the skill that when he's rode upon by a unit with only Aqua Force in its clan, you got to search your deck for a Blue Storm Armada card. So as of right now, there is only one Blue Storm Armada card. We'll probably be getting another one in set like 11 or 12 when we get the second Maelstrom support, assuming it happens, but I'm pretty sure it will. But you basically just add the one order card because that's all you can add. And then it has another skill which is actually very useful, which is during your turn, if you have a Vanguard with Maelstrom in its card name, it gets an extra 5k. So this actually is a 13k attacker, which means sometimes you will call it out with the Maelstrom skill, just to be a 13k body that can maybe restand twice. And just being able to hit those numbers is really important. Alright, so moving on to the next one, we do have Mr. Algos. So Mr. Algos says that when he's rode upon by a unit with only Aqua Force in its clan, you look at the top 7 cards of your deck, choose one unit card with only Aqua Force, or Tear Dragon from among them, you call it to rearguard, and then you shuffle your deck. So I think it is very important to be playing Algos in the ride line. I know a lot of people try and be cheeky and play Tidal Assault, with kind of the order package with the Zorga grade 1, or maybe you could even play Theo, because technically if you ride over this with Tidal Assault, you do technically get the search. But I think that just playing the Algos for that top 7 search is just so much more important, because this deck lives and dies on its Inlet Pulse Dragon. And because of this, you have so many ways of actually searching it out. Like, I've played like probably around like 50 games of this. I've missed Inlet in... Basically, what you want to do is you want to have Inlet by your first grade 3 turn. And I've missed that like maybe 5 times or something. And I think definitely Algos is a good reason that. Because if you draw into it, you have your 5 cards, you have your 2 draws for turns as you're riding up, and you have Algos. The chances that you'll see Inlet are pretty high. But yeah, okay, so Algos does have technically a second skill, but you never really use it. It's that if it attacks and it's the 4th battle of that turn or more, if you have a Maelstrom Vanguard, it gets a skill that it gets plus 5k, and that if it hits a Vanguard, you actually get a draw card. You never really want to use that skill because the 4th attack is really reserved for other things, such as Maelstrom himself. And even though it can be, sometimes you can have a 5th or 6th attack, you really don't want Algos there because you're only playing the one Algos in the ride deck, right? And the only way for you to really get it out is calling with Maelstrom skill. But if you're calling it out with Maelstrom skill, Algos has to be the first attack. And he doesn't necessarily have to be the second attack. But what you would have to do is you would have to go 1, at 10k, mind you, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. And that's just, you have better things to be going for. You really don't want to call Algos. He's like the first thing I Soul Blast after Eric, because he is not very important as an attacker. All right, and getting into the big man himself, the secret rare Blue Storm Dragon Maelstrom. So let's go over his effects. So the first effect is that you can discard a card. You choose a unit card with either only Aqua Force or Tier Dragon from your soul, and you call it to rear guard. And then it gets the ability that when it attacks a grade 3 or greater Vanguard, if it is the first battle of that turn, you counterblast 1 and stand it. So it does end up attacking as standing, as I've mentioned in some of the videos. But it gets that skill until the end of turn, and then at the end of the turn, it returns to the soul. So normally you don't really use that skill. If you're going first, you ride up. You don't call anything because you don't really have anything to call from the soul. The best thing call target you have is actually the Theo, which most of the time you really don't want to be calling. You would prefer to wait for your second grade 3 turn when you have the Inlet Pulse in the soul and just call it out. Swing as a pretty good attacker. But sometimes you do use it if you're going second just to get those 4 attacks. Sometimes you're like low on pieces and you didn't draw into the right stuff. But it's pretty good. Honestly, just like that, guarantees. If you just Maelstrom by himself guarantees the 4 attacks as long as you have 2 rear guards or you have 1 extra rear guard. You literally 1 card to discard, 1 card to call, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you get his second skill, which we'll go over right now, which is that when he attacks the Vanguard, if it's the 4th battle of the turn or more, you draw a card, which is unfortunately not optional. So if you do have 1 card in deck, you do actually have to draw that card. And then you choose one of your opponent's rear guards and retire. So basically just like the original Maelstrom, where you draw a card and retire. So it's pretty good in that respect. Definitely that extra draw, plus any inlet pulses, you're drawing like 2 cards during that turn, plus a drive check, so it's like plus 4 cards to hand every single turn. Which is one of the reasons why Maelstrom is just as good as it is, and it's really a sleeper hit. A lot of people are not giving Maelstrom the attention it needs. It can definitely be very tanky and play the long game, especially with like multi-attacking every single turn. But honestly, I think it's missing like maybe 1 or 2 things to actually pump it to the top. So hopefully once we get the Glory Maelstrom, it'll fix most of the problems that the deck has right now, which I think is like kind of a lackluster early game. But, well, we'll see. All right, so moving on into the main deck. Obviously, we're going to be starting off with the 3 other Persona Rides. You live and die on your Persona Ride. It's pretty important for this deck because you are multi-attacking, and having that extra 10k on the front row is very important to hit over defensives. Sorry I don't have the last secret rare, but I have a nice FFR to substitute for the time being. I'll probably be picking that up in a little bit. But yeah, definitely Persona Ride, very important for the deck. Alright, so next up we have my homeboy, the best card in Stoicheia, perhaps the best card in the game. We have the 4 copies of Mr. Inlet Pulse Dragon, the best card in Standard. Anyways, so Inlet Pulse Dragon, he has this first skill, which is not relevant, which is if you have Flagberg. But essentially, you do the same thing as Maelstrom does with its skill, where it attacks the first battle. Counterblast 1, restand it. In this case, it's a Soul Blast when you're on Flagberg. But the main effect, the effect that everybody loves Inlet Pulse for, including Leonore and every Stoicheia deck in existence, which is at the end of the battle. At the end of the turn, if you attack 4 more times, you can put him into the soul and draw a card. Such a good card. Gives you soul, gives you cards, is a very nice attacker, and is absolutely perfect in this deck. So Maelstrom can only call tier dragons, and of course Inlet Pulse is a tier dragon. So this is really your ideal call target from the soul. So essentially your game plan is to either draw into your Inlet Pulse dragons. You can actually discard them because of the order we're going to be talking about, which is something I'll do a lot. If you see my videos, you know why. But basically, when you ride into your Maelstrom, you call out your Inlet Pulse, you do your 4 attack shenanigans, end of turn, you put Inlet Pulse into the soul. Next turn, you discard 1 card, call Inlet Pulse back out, and keep swinging. Which makes this the most optimal use of Inlet Pulse, because if you see just 1, you are good. You can literally just ride an entire game off 1 inlet, just call it back every single time, and then every single other inlet you call will be another inlet that gives you another draw. So you swing, swing, move, swing, and then put them both to soul, draw 2 more cards. So Inlet Pulse is just so good in this deck. I would not try playing this deck without it. I mean, you could, but I would not recommend it. Alright, so moving on to, actually, that's all the grade 3s. I've noticed that a lot of the times grade 3s are kind of bricky, but we are going to be moving on to the orders, which is 1 copy of the Chalice, the Regalius piece, which, in case you don't know, if you have a grade 3 Vanguard with Persona Ride and you do not ride this turn, you basically just activate Persona Ride. So very good. It sucks that it's not a guard card, because sometimes you do are short on guard in this deck, but it does pretty good. Honestly, Persona Ride, just having 4 copies in the deck is very good. Alright, so moving on to the last of the grade 3s, and once again, another order. This is going to be, this card is supposed to be called Judgment of the Storm. I tried trading it out at Springfest, but apparently it's not up yet. But it's called Judgment Maelstrom for the meantime. So this is your Blue Storm Armada set order card. The only one you can search off with Theo. But basically, let's just go over its skill. So you play this if you have a Vanguard with Maelstrom in its card name. When it's put into the order zone, activate all the effects below. So you either choose a card with only Aqua Force in its con or a Tear Dragon from your drop, and you call it to Rearguard. So it's just, as soon as you play this, it's a free revival, which is why I discard all my inlets. Because when you do your ride line, you're going to be adding one of these to your hand anyway. So you can just play it back, call back your inlet, and you have your inlet for the turn. So it is pretty essential in that part, in that respect. And its second skill, which is you choose one of your rear guards, and it gets plus 5k for each other copy of this card in your order zone. So if you have one, you get nothing. If you play the second one, you get plus 5k. If you play the third one, you get plus 10k to 1 unit. And if you play the fourth one, you get plus 15. So you may be wondering, hey, that sounds like a really good effect. Why are you only playing 2 of this? That means you can only get up to 5k. The reason is this card it's a really good card. I will admit that. Having that free revival is really good, especially during the late game. But I ran into 2 big issues with this. One, I kept drawing into multiple copies, and of course you can only play 1 per turn. But because of that, you end up having a lot of no shield cards in your hand, which basically do nothing, and you might have like a huge hand at the end of turn drawing 4 cards, but it could be things like Persona Ride, Inlet Pulse, this card, and then you basically have no guard value. So I toned this down to 3. I was playing at a 4, I toned down to 3, and I toned it down to 2. So it does kind of suck not being able to consistently get that extra 5k and maybe not as consistently getting the revival, but you do get the 1. You just have to be a little bit more conservative when you use it. Like if you already have the Inlet Pulse in hand and you're not going to revive it, you can just keep this in hand, save it for a later turn. And just, I think 2 is perfectly fine. You're searching 1 out. If you draw into the other one, cool. If you damage check it, who cares? It's not the end of the world. But I just found myself preferring that I would draw into other things rather than this, like literally any attacker, because it does conflict a little bit with the Chalice. But if you think of it, most of the time, your first grade 3 turn, you're going to be playing the one you searched, and then your next turn is when this Chalice is finally live. Assuming you didn't draw into the other one, you should just be able to just play the Chalice. So 2 copies, I think, is fine. Alright, so moving into our grade 2s, we do have, of course, the 4 copies of Tidal Assault. So Tidal Assault is an Aqua Force, in case you did not play back in the day. But when he attacks, you can actually Soul Blast 1, choose one of your Vanguards with Maelstrom in its card name, and gets plus 5k. So now that skill is actually very good, and it's also not once per turn. So if Tidal Assault is attacking twice, which most of the time he will be, as we're going to see in the next skill, you can give your Vanguard up to plus 10k. So a lot of the times you do have a lot of excess soul, like a bunch of Inlet Pulses. If you have like 2 or 3 Inlet Pulses, you only really need 1 in soul. So Soul Blasting 1 out doesn't really make a difference. But I usually just use this skill once, just because of the attack pattern I usually go for. And just giving Maelstrom an extra 5k so that he hits 18 or 28 is good enough in most cases, because that means a 15k is a 1 to pass, or a if you're on Persona Ride, that is they need a 15k plus, or they need a 20k shield in order to just do 1 to pass, which is pretty good, I will say. But anyways, his second skill, which is the main reason we love Tidal Assault, is that at the end of the battle, he attacks a Vanguard. Oh, no, he doesn't actually have to attack a Vanguard. My mistake, which is why you can actually swing this at rear guards and still get that skill. So if he attacks and it's a second battle and your Vanguard is a stand Maelstrom, you can counterblast 1 and then just restand him. So you go 1, 2, skill, restand, and then sometimes you go 3. But usually it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is your main attack pattern. But yeah, Tidal Assault is definitely a super key piece in the deck because he gets you to those 4 attacks with 1 card. Most of the time, you just have 1, 2, and then this gives you your other 2 attacks if you don't want to use the Maelstrom skill. But he is very essential, and do note he is an Aquaforce, which means he is one of the pieces you can search out with the Algos. And sometimes you will if you can't draw into it, because he is very important in the deck. All right, so moving on, we have a little bit of a tech here. This is a card from BT5. This is Willfire Brave Shooter. So when this unit attacks a grade 3 or greater unit, if it's the 4th battle of the turn or more, it gets plus 10k until the end of battle. So it's a 20k attacker on the 4th attack or more, which is mostly when he is going to be attacking. You might be thinking, oh, why this card? Why are you playing this? The main reason is for Chronojet matchups and other early aggro matchups, because if you play the deck without this, you're playing a deck that has 4, maybe 5 grade 2s, which means if you're going second and your opponent is already at grade 2, you really don't have enough to call down to attack them. So I just am playing this mainly just to be a grade 2 vanilla body that I can call down on grade 2 turn and just like keep swinging at the Vanguard to rack up some early damage so that the late game is that much more threatening with all the multi-attacks that you're doing in the deck. And he does sometimes come up. He plays that second versatile position where he can play, you can play him right here. You can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then move him up with another card, and 6, so he's swinging for 20 or 30 on a Persona ride. So he does hit numbers. I wish he got like a little bit more, because 20 is not hitting over defensive most of the time. But you know, he's just there to be there, to basically just be a grade 2 vanilla that can hit a grade 2 Vanguard. All right, and so for my last grade 2, I have actually elected to play Algae, or Agli, which is from set 1, and it's a very simple skill. He's a Sylvan Horn Beast. If you retire him, you choose 2 of your units, and they get plus 5k to the end turn. So now there is another card that is very similar to this card from set 4, where it retires itself and gives one thing 10k. I really like that card. It is very good. If you want to play it, go ahead. It is a very good card. But I found this card to be much more useful, because there are times when you want to give power to 2 units. Like, let's say you have a Tidal Assault and you've got your homie Inlet Pulse Dragon. With that other one, you have to choose which one of these is going to be getting 10k. But I found being able to split the power is much more effective, because you can give 5k to Inlet Pulse. Now he's hitting for 18 or 28, which is a very nice magic number. That's a 10k guard or a 20 or a 20k guard, 10k or 20k guard. And while doing that, you can also give the extra 5k to the Tidal Assault, which means that he can hit unboosted for 15 or 25, and 25 will be hitting over a defensive, whereas if he was swinging for just 20, that no longer hits over a defensive. So I found being able to just split that power, giving the 5k to 2 units, basically just these 2 units, was much more effective than just giving one thing in a blanket 10k, even though most of the time the thing you're giving this power to, whether it's 5k or 10k, is going to be attacking at least 2 times. I just found that the 5k came in a lot more handy. All right, getting into the grade 1s, we have our most important best boy, Wheel Assault. So Wheel Assault's skill is that at the end of the battle that he boosts, if you have a Vanguard with Maelstrom in its card name, you Soul Blast 1, and then you choose 2 of your rear guards and swap their position. So Wheel Assault doing what Wheel Assault has done pretty much since the beginning. A very good card. Do note he is an Aquaforce, which means you can search him off the Algos, and you can revive him with the Judgment of the Storm. Honestly, most of the time you don't really need to commit him that much. Sometimes you do need him to, like, if your opponent is stupid and they try to damage deny you, Wheel Assault is your way to basically get your 4 attacks without any CB. So he's pretty good in that respect. But for the most part, he's kind of just a win more. He's the 6 attack enabler. You get like 5 attacks every turn. And then if you want a 6, you do need the Wheel Assault. So he's very good. Very good boy. All right, so next up, a couple of more techs. This is one I saw when I initially built the deck. I was looking up a deck profile, and I saw that they're playing like 2 copies of this card. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll throw it in. And then in testing, this card is actually very amazing. I love this card. So anyways, it is a 7k grade 1, which kind of sucks. And as a skill that is only active in the back row center rearguard, so behind your vanguard. So when your rearguard attacks, if it's the first battle of that turn, it gets an extra 5k until end of turn, which is so good. I cannot even stress how good it is. So basically, the main man we're going to be using this is, of course, our homeboy, Inlet Pulse. So picture this if you can. You Persona Ride, your front row gets 10k, and then you call Mr. Consort behind the vanguard. Now, of course, it's your second grade 2 turn, so you have your Inlet Pulse in the soul. Let me actually put my vanguard there. So you discard your card, you call out Mr. Inlet Pulse. First battle of the turn goes to Inlet Pulse because Maelstrom's skill needs him to be the first attack. So Consort sees this, gives an extra 5k to Inlet Pulse. Now, Inlet Pulse is at 28, which is a magic number. That is a 20k guard, which is either a front trigger or 2 cards from hand to guard. Now, as Inlet Pulse is swinging, you counterblast 1, restand the inlets. 28, guard that. You don't? Okay. Even if they get a defensive, okay, you're a 23. Or you go swing this, whatever. Third attack, swing Mr. Inlet Pulse. 28. 10k guard or 20k guard again. So good. That extra 5k that it gives to Inlet Pulse is just so good. But unfortunately, it's nice to see, but it's not vital. So that's why we're only playing at the 2. It does kind of suck that you make like shitty numbers. I mean, if you're going first, this is 20, which is actually a magic number. But going after that, you're going like 20, 30, 35 maybe. So actually, it doesn't really make that much of a difference because if it was like boosted by a 8k, it would just be like 31, which is not that much of a different number. But it is very cool. Oh, and one thing, if you are being cheeky and you have a Wheel Assault, sometimes you can actually just call this dude out here, not boost the Vanguard, and then just swing him for like your last attack if they have like really few cards in deck or deck in hand, which I've done a couple times, and it's really funny. All right, and so the last grade 1 is one that's actually not very important. It is the 2 copies of Prized Trident. So Prized Trident, in case you don't know, is when your other unit attacks, if it's the 5th battle of the turn or more, if it has to be the exact 5th battle, you put them into soul and countercharge. So this is mainly just for your more grindy matchups. Prison, this is your counter prison because they imprison it from soul, and then you call it back out and you get your free countercharge again. But if games go on too long, you can run out of CB. So you do kind of need this a little bit, but for the most part, he doesn't really do too much. He's like a grade 1 rush card, maybe a booster. He's kind of awkward in the deck, and in all honesty, because he can't really be an attacker, because like, he's not that good because, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is the 5th battle, which is when he triggers. So if you put him into soul, Wheel Assault can't put him up. But if you want to attack him with him, you have to do that. And then this is a 6th battle. You've already missed timing. So he does not really work with the deck that well, but he is nice to have. And it is super easy to proc him because most of the time you're getting 5 attacks as long as you have all your combo pieces. All right, next up, we just got the typical stuff. You've got your 4 PGs, your 1 Blitz Order PG, your Elementaria. And actually, another spicy tech that I have noticed doing pretty good is the 1 copy of Spiritual Body Condensation. So now, in case you don't know, this is just a Soul Blast 1. You choose something with a grade equal to or less than your Vanguard, gets plus 5k, and you call it to rear guard. So I played this because Judgment of the Storm does not actually target everything in your deck. So if you have a bunch of cards in your drop zone that are not Aquaforce or Tear Dragons, and you search out your Judgment of the Storm, right? You can't revive them unless they're Tidal Assaults, unless they're Soul Blasted Algos or Theos, or unless they're Inlet Pulses. You can't revive any of that. So I figured, okay, I want to keep the same amount of revival, at least 3, but I want a little bit more versatility. So this card, while it does cost a soul, where Judgment of the Storm does not cost any soul, like I said, you usually have an abundance of soul in the deck, so it doesn't really matter that much. But I think that just having that one extra little piece of revival has definitely come in clutch a lot. And of course, you can do the usual combo play like with Flagbird, where you soul blast out your Inlet Pulse, call it back, give it 5k, and now it is hitting for a nice magic number. Although in this deck, it would most likely be in the back row here, being the 6 attack, and you're calling out another Inlet Pulse from Soul to be the first and third attack. But yeah, it's definitely coming pretty well. I really like it. All right, so cleaning up the last bit of the deck, we do have the 8 critical triggers. So I do definitely recommend playing the dual pressure dragon, because he is actually a tier dragon. If you are absolutely in the worst possible situation, you can actually call this off the Algos. I've run into one situation in which I would have actually called the dual pressure dragon, but of course I didn't see him, because if you check top 7 and you hit all blanks, this is technically a card that is not a blank, and if you just are so desperate for a card on board, it will do in a pinch. I've had one situation where that comes up, but of course he wasn't actually there. I saw this trigger, my other triggers, and then literally the 3 non-Aquaforce cards that I play in the deck. So yeah, I recommend definitely playing this, because it's better to have options than not. All right, and of course, for the last one, we're just playing the extra 3 draw. So you don't really need the draw as much. It's super nice, especially in the early game. You do already draw a lot, so you do kind of have deck out problems, but not really, because you're not plummeting through it. You're literally just drawing a couple cards every single turn. So your deck usually can handle the stress of drawing that much, so it's not a big problem. And also, front triggers don't really do anything, because your Vanguard is the 4th attack, and at that point your front row rear guards are already rested. So obviously just the draw triggers. And of course, we are playing the 4 heal triggers. Now, of course, we don't have a tier dragon heal, so just play whatever heal you want. And of course, just rounding it out, we got to play the OT. Obviously playing Stoicheia because basically just to be another critical trigger. The faster you can finish games, the faster you can put them at high damage, the easier it is to close out the game. Alright, so I figure we're going to just finish off the video with a test hand and a little bit of an explanation of some of the combos. So we're going to go ahead and draw 5, take a look at what we see. Trigger, Inlet Pulse, Best Boy, Persona Ride, Draw Trigger, PG. So in this situation, this is actually a pretty decent hand. Persona Ride, clear keep. Inlet Pulse, clear keep. I always like to keep 15k to tempo the game a little bit to make sure we can guard early, so probably keeping that. Depending on the matchup, we might need the PG, but definitely we don't need this draw. We can just leave it in deck. But I think we're going to mull the PG because early game PGs are terrible, and we don't want to be seeing them. So we're going to draw R2, Tidal Assault, very important, and another Tidal Assault, nice to have, because we can always... if they retire our Tidal Assault, or if we intercept with it, we have another one to freshly call to replace it. So anyways, we're going to be starting off with this hand. Stand up, Eric. I'm going to draw a card. Ooh, a Wheel Assault. So we're basically just seeing all of our combo pieces already. In this case, we're probably going to discard the Inlet Pulse because he's doing nothing in our hand. He's not going to do anything for a while. So he can just sleep in the drop zone while we get our set up ready. Right into our Theo. Let's say they swing, guard OT to pass, draw for turn, another trigger, so it doesn't really matter. Discarding, I already have 2 Tidal Assaults, and there is the potential to revive them later. So in this case, we'd probably discard either Tidal Assault or Wheel Assault, because Wheel Assault isn't really necessary right now. But in this case, I think I'm going to discard a Tidal Assault. Or actually, I think we'll discard the Wheel Assault because we do have 3 more copies in the deck, whereas the Tidal Assault, we only have 2 more in the deck. So it's more likely that we draw into a Wheel Assault than a Tidal Assault. So riding into the Algos, we do actually get to search our deck for the order. And of course, we can't play it this turn because it is grade 3. So we're just going to be keeping it. Now, if I needed to rush, I would be calling out, what is his name? Will-powered Brave Shooter. But obviously we don't have anything. We don't really want to commit the Tidal Assault because this is a super key piece. And even though we could get a little bit of aggro rush with it, with basically just being a 10k vanilla, it's not really worth it. It's better to just keep it in hand. So we would probably just swing and pass, drive check. Like I said, another Wheel Assault, because there's a lot more in the deck. Okay, so during this next turn, we do want at least 1 damage. So let's say they hit us. Ooh, an Inlet Pulse. Kind of sad, but you know, it's fine. So they swing. Maybe we guard the second attack because we really only need 1 CB to do our play. So we are going to be standing up, drawing the card. And then in this case, Prize Trident, it's way too early for Prize Trident. I could use him this turn, but he's not going to really do anything for me because I have so much more open damage that I can still take. So we're just going to discard the Prize Trident. Ride into our Maelstrom, and then I'll go skill. We're going to be checking the top 7 cards of the deck. Let's see what we get. Okay, we can't call this. We can't call this. We can't call this. Can't call this. We are probably going to call that, and we can't call these 2 cards, of course. So obviously we only have 1 target here. In this situation, we do actually have all of our pieces. We have the inlet set up in the drop zone. We have the 2 Tidal Assaults, and we even have a Wheel Assault. So obviously we're going to be calling the Inlet Pulse Dragon this turn. But if we were missing one of the other pieces, we would go for either Tidal Assault or maybe even just like a Wheel Assault if we wanted. So this situation is interesting because we can actually go for 5 attacks on our first grade 3 turn. We probably wouldn't because it's a huge commitment. And since we're going first, our opponent is at grade 2. They don't have a lot of damage. The chances of them hitting a defensive are pretty big. So in this situation, I think we probably play things a little bit conservative. Just go for 4 attacks because we do need it to get to the Inlet Pulse, which we want in the soul. So our goal for the first grade 3 turn is to basically just get an Inlet Pulse in the drop zone, and then we are good for the rest of the game. So obviously we're playing Judgment of the Storm, calling back the Inlet Pulse that we discarded off ride deck, call out a Tidal Assault from hand. So we would just do our basic pattern. So if you wanted to be cheeky and just like rush early, you could call this and then move these 2, but I would not because there's a very high chance that your opponent hits a defensive. In fact, what you could do is if they called a rear guard, you could swing at the rear guard with the Inlet Pulse, preventing them from getting a defensive, and then you swing the Tidal Assault at the Vanguard. Using his skill, I usually use his skill as much as possible on the first swing. Soul Blasting 1, giving the Vanguard an extra 8k, which means that when Maelstrom attacks, if they're on grade 2, they can't just call a 25k because that is still a 2 to pass. Or that's still a 1 to pass, I should say. So Tidal will swing, stand him back up. If they didn't get defensive, great. Another swing at the Vanguard. And then, of course, the Maelstrom is going to be the 4th attack. You get to draw a card and then do your drive check. First check, nothing. Second check, PG. And then during the end phase, since we attack 4 times, we activate double Inlet Pulse, and then we draw the 2 cards. So as you can see, just from that 1 turn, we basically exploded our hand. We drew our 4 cards, our 2 drive checks, 2 off inlet, and then 1 extra card off of the, what was my drive checks? Oh, we got a PG this was already in hand. We basically drew like 4 cards that turn, and we have a very nice hand going into this, and we cleared our board, so there's only 1 thing that's actually there to like retire or attack into. So definitely in a really good position. So let's say we go to our next turn, take a couple damage, probably not going to be OT. We take like 2 damage because that's how much we really want. Ooh, we get a heal. They're probably at like 3 already, but let's say we heal down, and that's really good because we got an Inlet Pulse in there. So going into our next turn, our second grade 3 turn, we would draw. Of course, we do have the Persona Ride, so we're going to start off with that. Draw our card, and ooh, another Inlet Pulse. Who would have thought? So this hand is actually insanely cracked. You would go Consort, Inlet Pulse, Wheel Assault, discard Wheel Assault, call Inlet Pulse. And this is an insane board. of 6 attacks, hitting for super magic numbers. So you would swing, Consort, +5, 28, skill, counterblast 1, restand. Swing, Tidal Assault for 20, skill, Soul Blast 1, give Vanguard an extra 5k, skill, Counterblast 1, restand, third attack, 28 again, give me a 20k guard. Swing the Vanguard for 35, 20, 30, 35. Draw a card, retire a rear guard. Drive check 1, drive check 2. So this is another thing I'm talking about. This is a dead card. You can use it next turn, but it's terrible. Swing 28. Guard this for 20k. Soul Blast 1. Probably not Soul Blasting the Theo because Theo is actually a good card to have in Soul. Fuck you, Algos. Swing 6 attack 23. End phase. Soul into, draw 2. Your hand is massive. Alright, so I was actually planning on doing a little combo after that, but in the test hand we actually ended up popping off and doing like the main combo that you can do with the deck. So I am just going to be leaving it there because this video is already long enough. So I hope you guys enjoyed. If you're planning on playing Maelstrom, I love the deck. It is definitely a sleeper hit. I would recommend if you have the inlet pulses, go ahead and just build it. It's very cheap without the inlet pulses, and have a lot of fun with it. It's pretty good. Anyways, that's going to be it for me. Don't forget to do all those YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.